You are standing in a dusty street west of the Nile. It is barely dawn. Around 1240 BCE, the village behind you exists for one reason. The men who live here cut and paint the tombs of the pharaohs over that ridge in the Valley of the Kings. At the end of the street, a scribe is taking the register. He has a broken slab of limestone and a reed pen. He writes down who turned up, then who didn't, and next to each missing name, why. Brewing beer, building his house, stung by a scorpion, wrapping his mother for burial, drinking with a friend, which you have to respect for the honesty, and next to more than one name, one word, hesmen. His daughter was menstruating. That rock is in the British Museum. It covers 280 days of the reign of Ramesses II, and it is the oldest known attendance record on Earth, the ancestor of every working from home today you have ever sent. It logs a girl's period exactly the way it logs a scorpion sting. A reason in the record. Nothing else attached. So the question isn't what she used, it's what her civilization thought she was doing. We know a ridiculous amount about ancient Egypt. We know the beer ration of a tomb worker and the names of the men who complained about theirs. And no document answers this one. No papyrus sets out the method. No tomb wall shows it. And Egyptians painted everything. Sandal makers, geese being counted, a man force-feeding a hyena. The silence isn't embarrassment, it's authorship. The people holding the pens were men writing for temples, tax offices, and courts. And nobody records what everybody already knows. You have never once written down how to work a door handle. So the rest of this is reconstruction, out of cloth, medicine, payroll, and one word. Start with the word, because it carries more than anything else here. Egyptian religion ran on ritual purity, and purity is not morality. Priests shaved off every hair on their bodies, washed several times a day and again in the night, wore linen only, and rinsed their mouths with salt water before speaking to a god. None of that means, I am a bad person. It means approaching a god takes a specific state. There's a checklist. Fail it, and you wash and wait until you pass. Less clean versus filthy. More ready versus not ready. What got you clean was natron, a salt that dries out of desert lake beds, used to purify temples and priests and to dry the dead for mummification. One of the Egyptian words for natron is hesmen. The Egyptian word for menstruation is also hesmen. Careful here. That is not Egyptians thought periods were holy. Scholars have been arguing about this word for 40 years. Some read it as menstruation, some as purification after childbirth, and at least one insists the Egyptians kept the two senses firmly apart. But look at which drawer it got filed in. Not contamination, cleaning. Hold on to that. It explains the rest of the video. You'll read in 100 places that Egyptian women used softened papyrus as tampons. Be careful with that one. No papyrus tampon has ever been dug up, and the text usually cited for it describes medical plugs, not menstrual ones. It might be true. It isn't evidence. The better supported answer is boring. It's linen. Flax was one of the great crops of the valley, and turning it into cloth was an enormous industry largely worked by women. Linen was clothing, bedding, sometimes money, and it's what the dead were wrapped in. It came in grades, from sheer royal cloth down to worn-out rag. Here's the part that isn't guesswork. Egyptian medical texts describe folded and rolled linen used internally, pessaries soaked in honey or oil, placed to treat a complaint. The technique is documented, just clinically, rather than menstrually. Everything else follows. Folded pads, a sash to hold them, washed, dried in a climate that dries things aggressively, used again, then demoted to something else, because in an ancient economy, nothing is thrown away. And at Deir el-Medina, the laundry was a state service. The village was assigned washermen, paid by the crown. One record lists 8 of them. The most tedious part of this entire business was somebody's job. Egypt is where written gynaecology starts. Not one of the places. The place. In 1889, Flinders Petrie pulled a papyrus out of the ground at Lahun, dating to about 1825 BCE. Older than the Trojan War. Older than Tutankhamun by 5 centuries. It's the Kahun Gynaecological Papyrus. 34 numbered sections, each in the same tidy format: complaint, diagnosis, treatment. The oldest known text on women's medicine anywhere. Some of the theory is wrong. Egyptian doctors treated the womb as something that could shift out of position and cause trouble elsewhere in the body, and treated that by fumigation. You'll see it claimed that this is where the Greek wandering womb comes from, and every century of nonsense after it. That link doesn't hold up. The doctrine is first attested in Greek medicine 1,000 years later. Egypt gets blamed for a lot of things. Not that one. The practice, though, is often reasonable. Honey, genuinely antibacterial. Acacia gum, which ferments into lactic acid, which is genuinely spermicidal, which is why acacia sits in Egyptian contraceptive recipes next to lint and dates, and why they weren't pure wishful thinking. 3 centuries on comes the Ebers Papyrus. Remedies to bring a period on, remedies to stop heavy bleeding, treatments for pain. That first category is worth a pause. A drug that restarts a cycle and a drug that ends an early pregnancy are very often the same drug. The Egyptian texts don't editorialize. They give the recipe, which tells you how the subject was handled, not with horror, with a recipe. Back to that shard of limestone. Deir el-Medina is the richest source we have for ordinary ancient life. For a mundane reason. These workers could write. They wrote on rock, and rock survives. We have their letters, their court cases, their love poems, their complaints about management, and we have the attendance registers. Here's where it stops being tidy. We don't know why a woman's period meant a man stayed home. One reading is practical. If the women of the household were out of the normal run of the work, somebody had to cover it, and that somebody was him. A second is procedural. The household briefly in a different state, needing particular handling before things resumed. A third is contested. There are references at Deir el-Medina to something translated as the place of women, and some scholars propose a structure outside the village used during menstruation. Others think that pushes the evidence further than it goes, and the most careful study of the question concludes we cannot confirm it. But notice what all three share. In every reading, a woman's cycle is a fact the state's own labor bureaucracy simply absorbed. It went in the log. Nobody was penalized for it. One of the most deadline-driven projects in the ancient world treated it as a normal cost of employing human beings with families. Sit with that. Then go and think about your own workplace. Everything so far has been how. There's a question underneath it, and once you see it, you can't stop seeing it. How often did this actually happen? A woman today in a wealthy country menstruates something like 400 times in her life. That's the number we all quietly assume is just what a body does. An Egyptian woman's was nowhere near it. Menarche tracks nutrition and arrived later in a farming society with seasonal hunger. Then marriage, often in the mid-teens, then pregnancy, and pregnancy, and pregnancy. Then years of nursing. An Egyptian wisdom text tells a young man to remember that his mother fed him for 3 years. Extended breastfeeding suppresses ovulation. That's physiology, not folklore. Nobody can hand you the Egyptian number. But anthropologists have counted it in a modern farming society living the same way, and it comes out at roughly 100 in an entire lifetime. Few women there reach even that. A quarter of the modern figure, maybe less. Which turns the question inside out. For a great many Egyptian women, this wasn't the rhythm. It was the interruption. And when it came, it carried information. It meant not pregnant. In a society where children were labor, security, inheritance, and the continuation of your name, which the Egyptians believed was the actual machinery of immortality, that is not a small piece of news. That's why women were counting. That's why the papyri care far more about bringing a period on than about managing flow. We've been reading their priorities as a whole in the record. It isn't a whole. It's the answer. They wrote down what mattered most, and what mattered most was the signal, not the logistics. The logistics were solved. It was linen. Everyone knew. So, 3 things. The material was never the problem. Egypt was drowning in linen, and the physical part was solved thousands of years before anyone thought to write it down. The category was everything. Purification, not pollution. And that one filing decision runs all the way down the line into a state payroll log, into a clinical text that hands you a recipe instead of a warning. 1,300 years later, a Roman encyclopedist would write that a menstruating woman sours wine, blights crops, and kills bees. Egypt filed the same biology under cleaning. Same bodies, same cloth, completely different lives. And this is not a utopia in the desert. Egyptian women could own property, sign contracts, testify, start a divorce, but it was a steeply hierarchical society. And nearly all of this comes from one literate village attached to a royal project. The woman working a field in the delta left us nothing. She's the majority, and she's invisible, because we only know any of it by accident. That scribe wasn't documenting a woman's life. He was doing payroll, He wrote hesmen on a rock because he had to explain a labor shortfall to his supervisor, and because rock was free. The pharaoh those men were building a tomb for wanted to be remembered forever and spent a fortune on it. And we do remember him. We also remember a workman's daughter. Nobody carved her name into a temple wall. She got a broken piece of limestone and a single word. That turned out to be enough. So, out of everything in your life right now, the receipts and the messages and the notes you'd throw away without a thought, which accidental thing would you want to survive 3,000 years? Tell me in the comments. And if this is your kind of thing, subscribe. This channel is the ancient world as it was actually lived in, not as it was carved. There's another one on screen now,